couple of quick housekeeping notes here before we kick off. The webinar will be recorded and uploaded to all of our social media outlets shortly after we're done. If you have to hop off or you get distracted by phone calls, emails, etc., feel free to check out our YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, etc., if you want to review the webinar content here today. If you have any questions or comments about the material covered, feel free to drop them in the chat window as we move along. We will be addressing those questions, comments at the end of the webinar. If you don't see the chat window automatically open, there is an icon at the bottom of the Zoom platform for you to open it. Please do pay attention during the webinar. We will be giving away a $100 Amazon gift card, asking a question to the first person to answer a skill testing question that is covered during the webinar itself. Just another note here. So we are expecting our first stocking order of the Matrix platform to arrive in about 2 weeks' time. We're very excited about this new platform that Cambium is introducing. Really, it complements their entire solution in a pretty strong way, and we've actually had a couple of units to play with, and we've been quite impressed with what we've seen. We are expecting, pardon me, I already went over that. Again, MBSI WAV, we can help with planning, network design, post and pre-sale support at all levels, whether we're working directly with you as the end user, or if you are more of an integration value-added reseller, we can help you in that area throughout all of Cambium's portfolio. Introducing here today, presenting on behalf of Cambium Networks is John Mead. John is a Senior Director of Engineering for Cambium Networks, and he is based in lovely San Jose, California. Not going to say us as Canadians are a little jealous of the weather that they're having. So without further ado here, I'm going to kick it over to John to start the webinar.
Great. Thank you very much, Cody. Cody, can you hear me? I'm assuming my audio is coming through okay?
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear, sir.
Great. Appreciate the intro. So hello, everybody. Today, it's going to be a pretty short overview. We'll spend about 30 minutes. If anyone would like to dive deeper, by all means, get a hold of Cody or Nicole, and we can set up a separate meeting to dive deeper. So let me just jump right into this. So cnMatrix. Well, a little bit about myself first. I'm sorry. So I joined Cambium. I'm a relatively new employee. I joined about 1.5 years ago. It feels like it's been a month. It's gone by very fast. But I was brought on board to investigate the possibility of developing a switching portfolio for Cambium. It really is the logical next step for Cambium, and we put together some requirements, and I'm going to go through with you today not only the switches that we have today, but also our long-term strategy as well. So joined Cambium 1.5 years ago. Come from the Avaya Nortel network side of things. Been building switches for a very long time. So here we go. Next slide. I think I'm going to go to the next slide there. Yeah, there we go. Okay, a high-level view. So this slide right here is just kind of take a step back and give you a rough idea of our long-term strategy. You know, we're definitely not just building a single switch to pair up with our products. After our investigation of the market and figuring out really what we wanted to build, we came up with 3 different use cases or 3 different deployment scenarios. And that really resulted in 3 different families of switches, not just one switch. So these switches are purpose-built for these deployment scenarios. The first switch family here are the switches that we're shipping now. And this presentation will go into detail on these switches. And we started shipping on November 30th. So we've been shipping a little over a month now. Definitely a full availability. So I'll go into more details later on. The next switching family is targeted for ISP for the WISP market, where Cambium's core strength is. For this deployment scenario, we're going to develop a few different models: an 8-port version, a 16-port version, and a 24-port version. Though there will be AC versions and DC-powered versions as well. We are going to integrate in Cambium's GPS sync technology into the switch, as well as various PoE power budget levels, so we can accommodate devices that require low amounts of power, but also, for example, cnMedusa from Cambium that requires 90 watts per port. And of course, these switches will be slightly hardened, meant for inside of enclosures, but we'll have an extended temperature range on these switches as well. And these switches are targeted for the end of this year, towards the second half. The third family of switches is targeted at the video surveillance or the outdoor video surveillance market or smart city type of deployments. This switch is going to be hardened, fully hardened, will not be required to plug into or be inserted into an enclosure. It will be IP67 rated. We have lots of plans for other versions. The first version is going to be AC powered. We will be coming out with the DC powered version later for like solar applications. It's going to be relatively low port count. The idea is you put one of these switches out on a pole, for example, in a remote location. You can get connectivity to that location via a subscriber module. So we'll support the passive PoE required for Cambium's subscriber modules. And then the user can plug into that device whatever he wants. Our idea is, one or two video surveillance cameras, maybe an outdoor access point, so on and so forth. So anyway, that's our video surveillance family of switches. Now, with all three of these families of switches, I'll be talking about this a little bit off and on today, but we do support Cambium cnMaestro. So cloud-managed switches, you can manage all of Cambium's devices, including cnMatrix switches, with a single pane of glass. Next slide. So here we go. So these are the switches that we're shipping today. So these are the cnMatrix EX for enterprise. So the EX2K family of switches, there's 4 different models, and I'll go into the details of these here. First question, people ask me this a lot. Is this an OEM switch? It is not an OEM switch, and there's nothing wrong with the OEM strategy. You could easily go to China or Taiwan and find the switch that meets your requirements and needs. You can put your name on it, and away you go. We did not use that strategy. These switches are custom designed by Cambium. The hardware is custom, and the software is custom. So the hardware, we went with a dedicated silicon solution, and that enables us to do L2 and L3 line rate processing with a very rich set of functionality, extensive QoS, access control lists, filtering, as well as your expected L2 and L3 capabilities as well. The next point is the 4 different models that we have. So there's an 8-port model and a 24-port model. For each of those, we have PoE versions and non-PoE versions. So when I say 8 ports, I'm talking about the access ports. So there's 8 copper 1 gig access ports. In addition to those 8 access ports, there's 2 fiber uplink ports. These are 2 SFP or 1 gig uplinks. On the 24-port box, same thing, except we have 4 fiber uplinks, and those fiber uplinks are SFP plus or 10 gig uplinks. So the 24-port switch it's actually 28 ports, and the 8-port switch, it's actually 10 ports, and that's part of the naming that you'll see later. So the EX2010, the 10 represents the 10 ports, or the EX2028, the 28 represents the 28 ports. So what else? On these switches, we also have a USB port for file transfer, log files, error files, configuration files, or image files. What this port also is very commonly used for is charging your cell phone, a little side benefit there. On these switches, we also have true out-of-band network management port. So completely separate network. If the in-band, if the regular network goes down for whatever reason, you can still access these switches with this out-of-band port. And then, of course, there's a RJ45 console port as well. Worth noting, 3 of these 4 boxes are truly fanless. Open them up, there are no fans inside. The 24-port PoE, because of the heat generated by providing, we have a fairly healthy PoE budget. So the heat that's generated with PoE on the 24-port does require us to have some fans. Although in a future release, we'll have 2 modes, a low PoE mode and a high PoE mode that can be software configurable. In the low PoE mode, the fans will not turn on. Okay, this slide is kind of the key slide. It's my favorite slide. I can spend 2 hours on this one slide. I'll try to go through it quickly. This is about the capabilities and the features of these switches. And you know, I want to talk about the Cambium differentiation, the innovation that we put into these switches. But I think a little bit more important than that is the foundation of these switches that we've developed. You know, in the very beginning, we came up with 4 guiding principles for the development of these switches. And number one is the quality. We really wanted to come out with a switch that is dependable and reliable and robust. And so from the beginning, we thought of that and put it into our design and have you know, tested these switches very, very thoroughly. The next guiding principle was ease of use. So definitely we wanted to make these switches easy to use, easy to deploy, easy to configure, easy to maintain. And if there are problems on the network, you know, making it easier to troubleshoot. And this isn't just about troubleshooting the switch. The problem in the network, it might be associated with the switch, it might be associated somewhere else in the network. So we want to provide utilities, diagnostics tools to help troubleshoot the network. The third guiding principle is to be feature rich, to meet the needs of these enterprise deployments. You know, we're coming out with a switch. It's not new technology. It's a fairly mature space. I've been building switches for 20 years. You know, we're kind of coming out late to market. Cambium's developing switches. Strong complement to our existing products within Cambium, and that's why we developed it. So these switches, though, just because we're new to the switching industry, it doesn't mean we can't have all the features that are expected by the end user. You know, the features in our switches, just at a high level, I put them into 4 different categories: L2 switching, L3 switching, management, and security. For L2 switching, you name it, we got it. So long list of L2 features. L3 support is interesting. You know, these switches are targeted at the edge of the network or the access layer of the network. And at the edge, you don't necessarily have to have L3. There's a lot of edge switches sold out there that don't have L3. So some of the switches you'll see in the industry do have L3. They'll have static routes. We do support static routing. We also support dynamic routing so a fairly comprehensive solution for L3. And management, there's a lot of switches out there. There's unmanaged switches, there's smart managed switches. And then in this enterprise space, you'll mainly see fully managed switches. And these cnMatrix switches are fully managed, very comprehensive COI. So every feature, every sub-feature of every feature can be configured, monitored with our COI. It's a syntax, it's a Cisco-like syntax. So if you know how to configure a Cisco box, you should be fine with these cnMatrix switches. In addition to the COI, we also have our web GUI, and as well, every feature is instrumented with an SNMP MIB. So if there's SNMP based applications out there, it can be used with these switches as well. Security, definitely last but definitely not least, very important, and we have a long list of security features as well. So if I kind of hesitate and pause right here, just with these 3 kind of guiding principles, high quality, ease of use, and feature rich, we can now go to market and we should do well with other vendors and be able to compete with them. You know, we're new to market. They have some track record. That I'd say that's the only thing. So anyway, so I think we do very well just right here. However, we didn't stop here. We did do a little bit of innovation and differentiation, and there's 2 items I'd like to highlight. One is what we refer to as the intelligent edge. And we talk about this a lot within Cambium. For the cnMatrix switches, this really is about a suite of features. There's 3 main features that I want to highlight today. One feature is called policy-based automation. And what that does for you is it provides a true zero-touch experience. And this feature is big for us. I think you'll all like it. I'm going to go into more detail on this feature in the next few slides. The next feature I want to highlight is just security in general and how we've enhanced the security of the network. So what we can do on our switches is we profile the devices that are connecting to the switch, and based on that profile, we will auto-segment that device into the appropriate network or subnetwork or VLAN. The third aspect of the intelligent edge is being wireless aware. And this is really about all the other Cambium wireless devices that Cambium has today. So all of these wireless devices, both in the fixed broadband wireless space as well as in our Wi-Fi space, you plug those devices into a third-party switch and it works great. And that's how we've been selling it for the last 10 plus years. So you kind of get 1 + 1 = 2. However, if you take these Cambium wireless devices and you plug them into a Cambium switch, we can provide more functionality, more capabilities, and internally we talk about that as 1 + 1 = 3. So this is a big item for us as well. Now the second big, I think, truly differentiating item for Cambium on cnMatrix switches is the fact that we are cloud managed. So being cloud managed is they're becoming more common today, especially on Wi-Fi devices, very, very common. On switches, not as common. There are some vendors out there that have cloud management. Some really do have cloud management. Some just claim to have it. We definitely have it. It's not just cloud managed. It's cloud managed with cnMaestro. So cnMaestro, you guys probably know of cnMaestro. It wasn't an afterthought. We didn't take an existing management tool and convert it to being cloud-based. We grew this tool from the ground up and avoided a lot of the problems that other vendors are having today. So all the functionality that you expect from cnMaestro today, you will get that functionality on the cnMatrix switches. The onboarding and registration process, the zero touch for initial deployment, right? We can deliver the initial configuration to the switch as well as an initial runtime image. And then monitoring, probably the most common use of cnMaestro, and it's not just the instantaneous monitoring of a single switch. We have historical data of all the switches in the network, so you can do trending and graphs of the stats. And then fourth item, configuration. Of course, you can configure the switches with cnMaestro. And again, cnMaestro is not a device management tool. It's a system network management tool. So you can configure all your switches simultaneously. Whether the customer has one switch or 100 switches, you can push this configuration down to all switches in the network. And then the last aspect of cnMaestro, which I think is very cool, is all the utilities that it has to assist with troubleshooting the customer's network. So that's kind of a summary of the cnMatrix switches and the software functionality. I'm going to dive a little bit deeper. Before I do, cnMaestro. So here's just a couple screenshots I wanted to show you. You can view the switch, dive down into one of the switches. You can view the stats of that switch, or you can even drill down even deeper to a single port and get stats on that single port as well. Okay, so ease of use. This was my second theme or second guiding principle for developing these switches. And zero touch experience is what I want to touch on here. So what is zero touch? You hear this a lot in the industry, and it's about automating the configuration so that you don't have to manually configure it. And people usually talk about zero touch when it comes to initial deployment of your switches. So you plug your switch into the network, and what is that basic configuration that you need on that switch? And I've listed some examples here. You want to configure your VLANs, which ports are going to be used for your uplink ports, and do you want those ports to be in a trunk or a link aggregation? You can use DHCP for your IP address, or you can statically configure it, and so on. So whatever your initial configuration is for your switches, how do you get that configuration onto your switch? How do you automate that? How do you make that a zero-touch experience? So the solution at Cambium is cnMaestro. And zero touch, the way I've just defined it, is usually what people are talking about in the industry. However, I actually think there's a second aspect to zero touch, and even more important than the initial deployment of the switch. It's the configuration of the switch that is required for day-to-day operations of that switch. Listing some examples here on the right. So when you connect devices to your switch, you don't just connect them and walk away. You got to configure the switch for that device. So whatever the device is, access points, video surveillance cameras, or when you start talking about the IoT space, there's thousands and thousands of devices. But for these devices that you connect into the switch, you know, you want to set up your VLANs. You want that device to be on only the desired VLANs. You'd like to set up QoS settings, security settings, and so on. So when you connect devices, there's configuration required on the switch that you would like to automate. How about when you remove devices or moving devices from one port to another port? So removing devices is actually maybe even more important than when you're connecting devices. So when you remove a device, you want to clean up the configuration associated with that device. And that's important just from keeping your configuration clean and well managed. But even more importantly, you want to remove that configuration from a security point of view. If you have VLANs open on that port, you don't want to leave them open when you remove the device. So anyway, when you do remove a device, you do want to clean up that configuration. Same thing when you're moving devices, moving it from one port, you want to remove the configuration on that port and reconfigure it on the new port. The new port might be on the same switch, or it might be on a different switch in the network. So how do we accomplish this aspect of zero touch at Cambium? And we've solved this with a new feature that we have, which is policy-based automation. I'll dive a little bit deeper into that. So policy-based automation, what is that? That's the user will create policies for the device types or device classes or users that are going to be connecting to the network. These policies can be created using any one of the management interfaces that I talked about, COI, WebGUI, so on and so forth. However, if you use cnMatrix for configuring these policies, these policies now get pushed down to all the switches in the network. If you're using COI, the policy gets instantiated on only that one switch. In cnMatrix, it'll get pushed down to all switches in the network. It might be one switch, it might be 100 switches or 500 switches. And just one more point on that, you know, you really want these policies to be spread across all your switches. You want every port to be treated equal, not just the ports on an individual switch, but the ports across the switches. So you want to be able to plug that access point into any port of any switch, or your video surveillance camera, or whatever the devices are that you're going to be connecting. Let's see. Third point. So these policies have two components. There's the match criteria of the policy. We use the LLDP information that we see from these devices. Most devices support LLDP today, 802.1ab, or we will be supporting MAC addresses as well. Now, there's a lot of other match criteria that we're working on, DHCP signature, and so on and so forth. So over the evolution of this feature and future releases, we'll be bringing in new ways to discover these devices. The second aspect of these policies are the actions that you want to take. So when you detect a device being plugged into whatever port, you want to create VLANs, you want to make ports a member of those VLANs. For example, on access points, when you plug in an access point to port 5, you know, you want to create the VLANs that are associated with the SSIDs on that access point. You also need to make that port a member of that VLAN. But also, the uplink ports need to be made a member of that VLAN as well. Anyway, so all of that is automated. So this configuration that happens as a result of these policies is dynamic. When you plug in the device is automatically detected. The switch will learn about that device. We will authenticate that device to be allowed on the network, and then we authorize that device for one or more services like VLANs or QoS settings. And then we automate the configuration. Now, all that configuration is dynamic, and for a few different reasons, we'll clean up that configuration. If the link goes down for whatever reason, you know, the device is removed, if the match criteria is no longer valid, right? The LLDP information no longer matches that policy, we will remove the configuration for that device. Or if the IT or the network admin is manipulating the policy and removes that policy, that configuration will also be removed at that time. Okay, a little bit of an example here. So I mentioned an access point earlier. Let's say you have an access point that has 3 SSIDs, maybe an SSID for employees, an SSID for guests, and an SSID for contractors. So for those 3 SSIDs, you need to bind 3 different VLANs to those SSIDs. So in my example here, VLAN 40, VLAN 50, and VLAN 60. You want the native VLAN for that port or the PVID to be 40. And let's say we plug that access point into port 5. So if we were to configure the switch to do this, it's not that difficult of a configuration. It's about 10 or 15 CLI commands, and you enter those commands, and away you go. The switch is configured correctly. Now, if you plug a second access point into another port 10, let's say, you do have to re-enter these commands again. However, with policy-based automation, with this feature, you can replace all those CLI commands with this policy. What I have here in the presentation is what it looks like from a CLI point of view, but you can create this in cnMaestro or on the web GUI as well. Anyway, you create this one policy, and you no longer have to manually configure the switch for plugging in that access point. Also, this policy covers whether you're plugging in a single access point or you're plugging in 5 different access points. You're done with this one policy. Okay, so some key takeaways for this feature, policy-based automation. What it's doing is it automates the adds, moves, and changes that you do with your network. And hopefully you're not changing your network every day, but whether you're making changes once a day or once a week or once a month, it's all automated. It eliminates the error-prone and very timely manual configuration. So there's a stat that people talk about. I don't believe it's this high, but they say 80% of network problems are due to misconfiguration. So this feature, automating this configuration, goes a long way to removing those problems. Every port is treated equal. I've seen people configure their networks, and to avoid having to manually configure their switch, they'll hard code it. So like, ports 1 through 5 are for access points, or 6 through 10 are for video surveillance cameras, and so on and so forth. With these policies, there's no need to do that. Every port is equal. So a port is a port is a port. You just plug in your device and you're good to go. It enhances security, right? So for that device, you automatically put that device on the desired VLANs, and you don't accidentally put that device on a very sensitive and critical financial network or something like that. It can avoid hacking or reduce the likelihood. So I have to be careful with this statement here, little or no IT is needed. I'm talking specifically about deploying new devices. It simplifies the operation of deploying new devices. This frees up the IT team, of course, to be doing other, possibly more important activities. Also, as a result, you're reducing the time spent, you're reducing the expenses required to deploy and manage your network. Okay, moving on to the next part of the presentation. So where do we expect these cnMatrix EX enterprise switches to be deployed? So again, this is for our enterprise switches, not our WISP or video surveillance. So even though these are our enterprise switches, I do want to point out they can still be used in WISP environments. So I have a few bullets here over on the right. So these cnMatrix EX 2K switches, we do in the enterprise family, we do not have the integrated GPS, and we do not support the high power passive PoE that our products like cnMedusa have, and we don't have DC powered options. However, there are a lot of WISP deployments that don't need those 3 factors. So, for example, in EPMP based towers, you don't need the integrated GPS. You don't need the high power that cnMedusa requires. For EPMP towers that require a DC powered option, we don't have that. But for all other scenarios, these EX switches would work just fine. One other scenario that I'd like to point out is the cnM5. So cnM5 that Cambium has, it's not a switch, it's a mid-span device. So that mid-span device, what you do is you couple it together with a switch, and cnM5 will provide the integrated GPS, and it will provide the high power that you need for cnMedusa. So in those types of deployments, the switch that is bundled together with cnM5 up till now, customers would use, I don't know, Cisco or HP or Aruba or whatever. Now you can use the Cambium switch on the EX family of products. Okay, the next slide. This is the real, the key deployment scenario. This is a typical enterprise campus. What I have in this picture is a 3-tier network. It also applies to a 2-tier. If you don't have a separate distribution layer, then it's a 2-tier network. And in this architecture, in this slide, I'm really focusing on the access layer, which is where these switches are targeted. These EX switches are not core switches. So at the access layer, you have your wired switches, but you also have your wireless solution as well. And we've had cnPilot. We've been shipping cnPilot, doing very, very well for us. And that provides the wireless connectivity. However, up until now, we were missing the second half of the equation, having the wired solution. So now with cnMatrix, bundling cnPilot and cnMatrix together, we really can provide a complete solution for the access layer. And that's the real point of this slide that I want to make. And, kind of the magical trio, I'll touch on this a bit later, but cnMatrix with cnPilot, and then cnMedusa for management, cnMaestro, sorry. That trio is really a key comprehensive solution for the customer. So this access layer, it's a big portion of today's network. I think it's the switches are an $8 billion market space. The access points are another $6 billion. And I'm talking about just at the access layer. I'm not including the switch revenue from distribution or the core or from data centers. It's a big space. Okay, so summarizing cnMatrix, enterprise grade, layer 2 and layer 3 functionality. Very, very key, cloud management with cnMaestro, and ease of use. So zero touch provisioning, not just for the initial deployment of the switches, but also for day-to-day operation of the switches with the feature policy-based automation. Enhanced security, so device profiling and auto segmentation. And then the complete access layer, right? One vendor end-to-end story, cnMatrix plus cnPilot plus cnMaestro. And then all those points, along with the limited lifetime warranty that we have on cnMatrix and the best-in-class support that Cambium offers, it really provides a best-in-class TCO for the customer. Okay, so I went through that pretty fast. I'll go to the chat window now and go through any questions that you guys may have. Okay, so Nicole or Cody, can you guys still hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great, thanks, Nicole. All right, I'm looking at the chat window here. Pretty small. Okay, I don't have, let's see, if you have any questions, please enter it in the chat window. Here comes some. What is the operating temp range on the WISP family? So the operating temp range on the existing enterprise switches that we're shipping now is 0 to 50 Celsius. We are going to expand that range for the WISP, but we don't have the exact numbers yet. Targeting minus 10 to 55, minus 10 to 60, somewhere in that range. The aggregate throughput on the switches. So for example, on the 24 port switch, we have 24 1 gig ports plus 4 10 gig ports. And because of our dedicated hardware plane for switching, we can process all the packets at line rate. And that's for L2 switching and L3 switching. So it gives us a total switch bandwidth throughput of 128 gig. So that's the 24 1 gig plus the 4 10 gig. So that adds up to 64 gig, and they're full duplex. So the way companies quote that number is twice that number. So 64 gig giving you 128 gig. Yeah, so dirty power. Not sure how to answer that question. I don't have a succinct answer to that, although I've experienced this a lot. So, I've been building switches for almost 20 years, and this is a problem, right? We see this a lot. So let me get a better answer for you, and I'll respond separately. Yeah, so the enterprise switches, like I mentioned, we don't have a DC powered option, although we're working on it as we speak. So later this year, we will have a DC option of our enterprise switches. That's actually being requested quite a bit for our lower end WISP space to go with our EPMP products. Email alerting coming out. No, although that's not a new request. So this would be a feature associated with cnMatrix. So cnMatrix, this is on their feature request list, although I do not have a date for that feature coming out. Oh, what chipset is cnMatrix switches used? It's not custom silicon. We did not design our own proprietary silicon. I've lived that life, and it's not worth the effort. There are some very sophisticated solutions from a couple different vendors. The big ones, Marvell and Broadcom. So I've used both over the last 20 years, and for these switches, the enterprise switches, we are using Marvell silicon, and we're going to stick with that for all three families of switches. So I'll go into that a little bit deeper. So common hardware architecture to all three families of switches, and same software. So it won't be the same binary or the same executable that you can download on any switch. It's the same source code, but it will be 3 separate binaries, one for each family of switches. Okay, next question. Boy, you guys are asking good questions. Okay, so for the DC powered switches, we are talking about this a lot. What is the range of input voltage that we want to support? 48 only, or a larger range, 24, 48, so on and so forth. We're still working through this conversation, so I don't want to mislead you, but we're getting enough requests for 24 as well as 48. So very likely that we will support 24 volts. And it's okay that you mentioned that other company. No problem at all.
All right, so I think that does it for questions. If there's any last minute questions, folks, please do feel free to pop them in the chat window there before we wrap up. That being said, we will head to our skill testing questions. So anybody who might have hopped on late, we are giving away a $100 Amazon gift card that will be distributed to you digitally shortly after we close up here. So I will give everybody just a few seconds to make sure they have the chat window open. Again, the box for it is just at the bottom of the Zoom platform. So I'll just give everybody a few seconds to open that up before I ask.
So Cody, so it's whoever types in the answer first?
That is correct. It is a speed round. So everybody's got to get those fingers ready.
And you said this was how much? $100,000? Is that what you said?
Just $100 Canadian, so just a couple bucks US, unfortunately. Okay,
all is good.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so here we go. What cnMatrix feature significantly contributes to an ease of use experience for the user by providing a true zero-touch experience for not only initial deployment, but also day-to-day operations of the switch? And we have our winner, William H. You are our lucky winner, and we got lots of answers coming in, and they are all correct. So William, Nicole will be in touch with you shortly after we wrap up here to award that. And thanks everybody for playing. Again, I don't think any other questions have come in. Just double check here.
Hey, Cody.
Yes.
Hey, just one more comment on the policy-based automation feature.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is a great feature to demo to customers. When I go to shows and so on and so forth, You know, you have a switch in front of you and you do a show config, and you see that there's only the default configuration that exists. But with a policy installed, when you connect in the device, you do a second show command, and all of a sudden there's pages and pages of configuration that magically shows up. So it's a very impressive demo. And the demo's not over yet. When you remove that device, and then you do a show config for a third time, all of a sudden the switch is all the way back to its default config. And it's a pretty impressive thing to demo. So if anyone wants to learn more about the feature, how to demo it, so on and so forth, for sure give Nicole, Cody a call, and I can join a call with you guys and get you started.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that comment, John. So again, if anybody on the session here today, if you want to have more of a personal one-on-one, we certainly do encourage you to reach out to your MBSI WAV sales rep, and we can rope John into doing more of a one-on-one session. So that being said, we thank you all for your time. I know that's the most valuable resource that most of us have. Again, if you do have any questions about Matrix or any of Cambium's other product lines, their vast product lines, please do get in touch with your sales rep. We will be, and just a reminder for anybody who might have popped on late, we will be posting this on our social media outlets, our Facebook, LinkedIn, etc. So YouTube. So please do have a look there if you happen to miss maybe the first bit of the session. We will be, as MBSI WAV, we will be hosting some more series of webinars here in the coming weeks. So we will make sure that everybody is getting that information to jump on sessions that interest you. And just a reminder that our first stocking order of the Matrix platform is scheduled to arrive, I believe, the week of February 11th. So pretty quick here. We do have some pretty heavy pre-orders already. So if you are interested in getting one in the first initial shipment, we do encourage you to reach out. And if you want some pricing specs, etc., please do reach out. That being said, thanks again, everybody, for your time. Thank you, John, for the content. I know I learned a lot, and hopefully everybody else did. And thank you, Nicole, for getting the cats herded. Thanks, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day, and we will talk soon. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.